Hi, everyone, and welcome from the Daniello Institute for Veterans and Military Families at Syracuse University. This is Vanessa Marquette, and this is What's Brewin. As many of you know, April is Month of the Military Child, a month we dedicate to show support for resilient military kids all around the world. And today with me, I have Erica and Jeanette from our IVMF research and evaluation teams to share about their experiences as military kids and some of the data we have on military families. So as a military child myself, I'm pretty excited about this conversation. So thank you both for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
So first, do you want to start off by telling us your names, military affiliation, and what you do now at the IVMF?
Hi, everyone. I'm Jeanette Harvie, and I am currently a research associate at IVMF. I work in the applied research team. And my military affiliation, I am the spouse of an active duty service member, and it's been 14 years as of this year.
Hey, and hi, everybody. I'm Erica Hawvermale. I am an evaluation associate with IVMF. Both of my parents served in the U.S. Air Force. My mom was in personnel relations and retired soon after I was born, and my father flew search and rescue helicopters for 26 years. He retired when I was in 6th grade.
Well, thank you both for your service. And Erica, now that we're talking to you right now, I know you've moved around quite a bit as a military child with both your parents serving. Can you tell us a bit what that was like from your experience?
Yeah, sure. So that happened when I was relatively younger, and I was very fortunate that once I was in middle and high school, I got to stay in the same place because up until then, we had lived in Florida, New Mexico, Washington State, Arizona, and then finally Utah. And then after college, I moved here to Texas. So it was very common for us every 3 years to pick up and move, which meant on the one hand, leaving friends, which was hard, though I think it's easier for younger kids. I always found it just to be a new and fun adventure. One of the biggest challenges that I, though, found was changes in curriculum, because every state teaches different things, different years. And so depending on the move, I would be either ahead or behind in school, or like I would miss a state history because that was taught 1 year, and then I would get, US history twice, things like that. Though it looked out for me with the final move because I was actually able to move forward a year in math because Arizona was a year behind Utah, which put me in a great spot for AP classes later on. But really, like I said, I thought it was a grand adventure when I was younger, to the point that we had a choice in our final station. And my parents put that choice to me because they didn't care where we ended up. And I chose the place we hadn't lived before because I wanted something new and not to return to a state we had already been. So I think for me, the biggest thing was both the adventure, but also just the academic challenges that come with that. Though we were really lucky, the helicopter community is incredibly small in the Air Force. And families that we saw in one location, we would see in another. So I actually got to pretty much grow up with another only child, military child in the Air Force. Her dad flew with my dad pretty much in every location we ever lived. And so there were some reoccurring faces, which definitely helped. And a small community to the point that my dad's old unit is still messaging me on like LinkedIn and asking I have the connection to him so that they can find him again and chat, which is just, it's really fun getting tapped into that regardless of where you are. But
that's awesome.
I will stop there because I will just roll.
We love to hear it. We love to hear it. Thank you. Jeanette, and your experience was a bit different growing up in Taiwan, having your father serve, and now you're an active duty military spouse, as you mentioned, and have a military child as your own. So can you give us some insight into what that transformation was like and how being a military child in another country prepared you for what you're doing now?
Sure. I think for me, my experience was sort of this interweaving between being an immigrant, but then also being a military child at the same time. And so I was born in Taiwan, a little brief history. I was born in Taiwan, but I did spend several years moving back and forth between the DC metro area and my hometown, Taipei, Taiwan. And my father, he is a retired colonel in the Taiwanese army. But he was also an auditor for the Taiwanese Army, and he later worked as a information management professional with the Army. So he had this, he was mostly on staff, but he also moved our family back and forth. And what Erica actually was mentioning about like the curriculum difference, and we know that's like a big piece or a challenge to some military children. I sort of experienced that, but it was like it was more, I guess, dramatic in many ways, because then we're talking about two completely different education systems, because I attended public school in Taiwan. I also attended public schools in the United States. So there was like this curriculum difference. There was like a language difference. And so there would be, for example, years where like my Mandarin, I'm like both like a native Mandarin and also English speaker, but like my Mandarin would be stronger, and the other years my English would be stronger depending where I was living. And so by the time I went to college, I had attended 4 different elementary school, 2 middle school, 2 high school, and I think this is sort of the common experience, right? Like Erica mentioned, for military kids here in the United States. So after I finished high school in Taiwan, I decided to attend college there and then move back again to the United States to finish my graduate degree. So I think the rhythm of the military life wasn't unfamiliar to me. And then when I met my spouse and after I got married, there was a small-ish learning curve in terms of like the lingo and also some of the military culture that were not obvious to me as a child. But a lot of these sort of the rhythm, I think, of the life was very, very similar. And so from that perspective, I really felt almost at home, when it's time to move. We moved a lot, and combine that with my personal history of, being grad school and then, working in academia a little bit, that, that moving piece was very familiar to me. But I think those are some of the things that I've taken, and hopefully I will like be able to really utilize and sort of pay attention to now that I have a daughter. She is she's 4, she's almost 5 now, but she's, lived in 3 different places already. Not that she remembers all of them, but, we've moved twice since she's born, and she's attended, like 2-3 different little schools. And so would be, so going into the next school year, it would be actually the first time that she's staying at the same school for more than like one kind of cycle. So I'm extremely excited, I guess, for lack of better word. It's like, oh wow, stability for a second. Yeah. So I don't know how long that's gonna last, but for me, I think those experiences growing up, this constant flux is not unfamiliar to me. But then I think it also made me really aware of what are some of the challenges that may come up, and what I have to do to sort of protect and also encourage my own military child in this particular lifestyle.
Yeah, and speaking of challenges, that leads into our next question. As we all have mentioned, military children face unique challenges depending on if their parents are active duty, reserve, guard, retired, or are caregivers, or they're caring for, or they're being cared for. So could you talk about the research and what we know about those challenges?
Sure, I'm going to start, and then hopefully Erica can give us a little bit more insight on some of the pieces that I don't get to cover. So we at the IVMF, we have some research on military children, and so one of the big pieces that we always see in our research, talking to our respondents, their responses in our surveys, is that, we find that moving is a very big part of the life of the military child. And particularly, we're talking about active duty families. So many folks, and I think Erica agreed, like this is a huge opportunity for a lot of families to go to different parts of the United States and also different parts of the world, but it is not without challenges. And I think that's sort of what we are we're seeing, is that, all the years that we have data from the annual military lifestyle, family lifestyle survey, is that, active duty family, these respondents with kids, they, report a lot of strengths, but then also a lot of difficulties associated with moving and other transitions of the families, such as like deployments. And so a lot of these common themes we are seeing is that, parents, they want to talk about, some of these adaptability pieces of their children. They talk about, challenges, or also the gift of being able to make new friends and new places. And then also this openness to all sorts of different experience. So those things really, build up, the military child and help them build resilience. But they also create, pressure and tension and stress, right, on the children and the family unit. So we see a lot of, like good things that comes out of this lifestyle, but we also see a lot of concerns from parents. And I think part of it is also there's a lot of external pieces that really affects sort of how military children are kind of doing from year to year. Like when we had the pandemic, there was a lot of like home virtual schooling, and when we have, we're operating in higher like OPTEM, we see a lot of deployments and a lot of disruption in military children's lives, that creates pressure. And how do parents work with that? And so we see a lot of that. And we also see that, like anecdotally, many families, they care a lot about their children's education. This becomes a very important aspect of their decision on this in this lifestyle. And so what we really what we really try to understand is that, how do families or how are families able to kind of work with that? And for example, the families, they're trying to provide consistencies. And so part of the challenge of the lifestyle is that, do we all move? Like, for example, if my child is doing really well at the school, and do we all move on to the next, part of this military career for the service member or service members? Sometimes they're dual military. And so this is sort of that unevenness that we do see in the research, is that families are, there's a lot of good parts to the moving, all the opportunities it brings, but it also brings a lot of stress to these families. And the second piece is that separation from the service member or service members is hard, and it's often a huge logistic puzzles for military families. And we're not just talking about active duty family, we're also talking about Guard and Reserve families. So when we, most recently, we published the results from the 2021 Military Family Lifestyle Survey. And even among National Guard families and Reserve families, for example, over 40% are very concerned about the amount of time away from family due to this military lifestyle. And in the recent years, we've seen sort of the OPTEM kind of like move up for some, a lot of the Reserve and National Guard units, because they're deployed, not just overseas, but then also other needs for within the domestic US, right? And so, for example, nearly a third of these National Guard and Reserve families said they've experienced separations for longer than 6 months at a time. And then, so this is very similar to what military families, like active duty families, are experiencing. But when these National Guard and Reserve family, the service members, when they're away, sometimes they don't have the same type of resource and access to resource as active duty families. And so this creates like a different set of challenges for these families. And so when we, like when we look at some of the data we have, and especially anecdotal data, people or our respondents are, National Guard Reserve service members, but they're very concerned about their families, and especially when they're away on their like military time, right? And so, they have to think of like very creative ways sometimes to deal with like the childcare piece and how to manage some of the household responsibilities when one of the parents is away from home for an extended period. And this is without maybe the same infrastructure that an active duty family would have, let's say on a military base, or being very closely affiliated with the military base. So these are some of the things that we have seen in the recent years. So moving is hard for military children. It brings opportunities and also have challenges. And then all of the currently serving families, in general, are they're pretty concerned about time away from family. And this is one of the things that they are always kind of in the front of mind.
And I can attest to the Guard and Reserve one coming from a family of Guard and Reserve. So it's definitely a lot more than people think on the outside as well. So Erica, you were going to talk about the veteran and caregiver children as well.
Yeah. And we see very similar things among children that have a service member that was wounded over the course of their service or have some sort of disability, which can include everywhere from physical disabilities all the way through to just post-traumatic stress. But similar to children who are experiencing a parent who is deployed, they often experience some symptoms of psychosocial stress. They also experience trouble with academic performance, which can very easily be mediated through various organizations, programs, and help. But they are stresses and challenges that those children have to deal with, particularly when they are older and have to step into more of a caregiving. Mm-hmm. Just like when a parent is deployed, if you have a parent that is having trouble doing tasks around the house, older kids are often asked to step in and help their primary caregiver parent with those tasks. And then similarly, those children might experience disruptions in their routine. And although that might not be due to an operational tempo or deployment, it very well can be due to various medical appointments or challenges experienced at home that are directly linked to the medical challenges of their veteran parent. So different causes, but very similar outcomes.
Thank you both for sharing all of that data with us. It's super interesting to hear about the different things that they go through and challenges. So if we're almost done, so if you could give one piece of advice to other military children, what would it be?
I can hop in on this one. There are so many organizations out there that are directly geared towards helping military families and particularly military kids. So one of my biggest pieces of advice, in all honesty, regardless of the age of a child, is to get involved in those support structures, be it with United Through Reading that helps service members stay connected with their children and vice versa while they are away from home for any military related separation, be it training, deployment, etc., late nights, weekend training, be it our military kids that provides extracurricular grants for Reserve and National Guard and Coast Guard families that are experiencing a deployment, or for children of a severely wounded veteran. Wounded Warrior Project has stuff. Like there are so many organizations that have various programs geared towards helping support our military children, that getting involved in any capacity with one or more of those can be such a massive, massive help. There are people out there that want to support service member families and show their appreciation. And nobody is in this alone. The military community is fantastic. So reaching out and accepting those offered hands is a great support structure.
Definitely. Thank you, Erica. Jeanette, do you have anything to add?
I think Erica makes it really, I really love that, you know, like there is so much support and resources out there for military children, military families that, you know, a lot of people want to help. The services themselves have a lot of, have a lot of programs and resources available. So I definitely want to echo that, get connected, talk to some people, figure out what is available, and you can utilize that. And then, maybe my advice could be a little cliche, but I think for me growing up, it's not always pretty, right? And sometimes it's very stressful. And, when you're 14 and your parents said, sorry, we got to move to another country. It is a little hard to understand, but I would say that, all those things really, kind of build like who you are. And it gives you a perspective, when you're very comfortable, it's easy to be kind of set in your ways. But when you're constantly moving, having to learn different things, I think it really helps develop this almost like a growth mindset. I know that's kind of like a buzzword nowadays, but it really does. Like it forces you to grow in different ways. It forces you to learn different languages, force you to understand different culture, and just, embrace that, have that be a part of you. And maybe later on you could say, oh my gosh, I don't want to move anymore, and just, really settle down somewhere. Or you can say, hey, this is like the lifestyle I actually enjoy and don't mind, and you pick it up and you keep going. And so I think whatever the route, or I guess some people say route, but whatever the path it is for individual military children, there is a lot of possibilities. And being a part of this lifestyle when you're younger cultivates your ability to kind of choose that path when it reveals itself, sort of. So I think to really embrace the life, to stay curious and to get connected, I think those would be kind of my advice for a military child living the military lifestyle.
Awesome. Thank you both for joining us today and sharing all of that. Appreciate it. And if you want to learn more about some of the data we talked about, you can head on over to our website at ivmf.syracuse.edu. And that's what's brewing at the IVMF, in service to those who serve.